I'm very happy today to be with one spiritual visionary friend, Romy. So, Romy, welcome to the After Trauma.
Thank you for having me.
And I would like to start this podcast by explaining a little bit the title, The After Trauma. And that's a little bit ironic because trauma has to do less with what has happened to us in the past and more about who we are after the traumatic event took place. And by that I mean not only the negative but also the positive aspects as well. But specifically, I would say the negative effects, flashbacks, low self worth, insecurity, all these elements that we carry with us after the traumatic event took place. So, I would like to start by defining the trauma. And although we know that there is an official definition for trauma, I would like to hear what you define as trauma.
Well, trauma has many definitions, own experiences. Everyone has their own interpretation, isn't it? The way I perceive trauma is anything that doesn't happen the way you want can be classified as trauma, especially as a child. That's where most of the traumas has been formed, and I don't feel that anyone has missed out because whether you acknowledge a trauma or not, it's there. We could look at some examples, isn't it? Let's say you were a child and you wanted a glass of water, and your mom didn't give you that glass of water, and then that can become a trauma, isn't it? And then we make stories out of the trauma. That could be, my mom doesn't love me, I'm not enough, or I need to prove something to be loved. Or other side of the stories could be that women are this, women are that, right? So the trauma is the one impact, but we get trapped in the impact, and as adults, we try
Right.
to give different meaning, shapes, and forms to those traumas and the stories we make. And that's where I think you said it very right, like more negative experiences than positive,
Yeah.
because this trauma, once we get trapped, we always look at the negative side, which our brain is wired about 80% of the time. So 80% of the day, our brain is wired to think negatively. So this is what I feel that trauma is. And we could look at other example. Let's say you were in a school, right? And let's say somebody stole your pen, and you felt that that was your pen because you identified yourself. This is my pen, right? So somebody took your pen, so you feel that somebody took which belonged to you as an identity, right? And that can become a trauma.
That's so interesting because when we talk about trauma, we don't think about these small things that can cause trauma at a very young age. And that's also very interesting what you said that something that happens, we may take this personally, and I have this happening a lot with the trauma. It happens something, and then also when we're adults, like you said, and then we carry this thing from a very young age, and something happens at work, for example, or in an interpersonal relationship, a romantic relationship, and we tend to think that we take this personally. This person doesn't love me because if this person loved me, they would do this, they would have done this. So that's why I call this after trauma, because it's so much about what you carry
Yeah.
after this trauma took place, specifically at a very young age.
Yeah, I think you're so right, because I feel that, let's say you're a child and you say, this is my pen. And what you're saying after trauma, it becomes, when you grow an adult, it becomes my wife, my husband, my country, my job, my house. And anything happens to these identities we call, you'll be traumatized. Let's say your partner leaves you, and because you identify yourself as my wife or my husband, this person leaves you and the trauma begins. Because from the childhood, you became to identify as mine, and that's where all the challenges starts after trauma.
So then, Romy, I do have a very interesting question. Then, is it about trauma or about our attachment? A trauma. Perhaps this also includes the label of trauma that we also use sometimes as an excuse. I have experienced this trauma, so I tend to do this. So, is it really about trauma or about how we execute, how we choose to execute after the trauma has taken place?
I think it's both. I think it's a trauma and also the stories, which is attachment and labels we make after trauma has happened. And that's what keep us in the body. It get trapped in the nervous system. So I think it's both the trauma and the stories and the labels we make after the trauma.
Then, because it's interesting, you see some people who have experienced a lot, but they don't look like that. They look like they managed to overcome what they have experienced, negative experiences, traumatic events, and you look at them and you cannot tell. And you can see other people who are also too anxious, very anxious, they cannot handle simple situations in their lives. So that's why I'm wondering if it's really about trauma or about how we choose to execute after the trauma has taken place. That's interesting. I would also like to talk a little bit about the self-defense mechanisms we use in our lives, and we very often are not aware of them because they happen automatically. For example, we people sometimes tend to ignore the traumatic event, like to cover it and to hide it so that we survive, so that we defend ourselves. That's why we call it self-defense mechanisms. And other mechanisms as well. We deny that this has happened. We try to forget it, to cover it, to hide it. We turn into other tendencies like workaholism, perhaps, and we think that this is a personality trait, but it's rather a trauma response. We try to forget something that has happened. Hyperfunctional. We are not only are functional, but we are hyperfunctional. We overperform. How does this work for you if you ever have experienced these self-defense mechanisms, and what this would be? Because everyone experiences this differently.
Well, that's a very interesting question and intake as well, isn't it? So from my understanding, the reason we have self-defense mechanism is our mind, or even our trauma, you can say, is trying to avoid pain. That's very simple. Your mind is trying to avoid pain. But it's very ironic because that same pain will manifest what you're saying in different shapes of form. So some of the example of self-defense mechanism will be avoiding intimacy or overperforming at work, because in the underlying, you're trying to avoid pain. You don't want to feel pain. And that's why you shut people away. You run away from your own feelings. In my case, I was workaholic. When I grew up in India, I never touched alcohol, but in order to suppress my feelings of pain, when I went to Australia at a young age, I started to drink a lot, even smoking. I started smoking, but in essence, I became so uncomfortable with those painful feelings, I started to cover up through alcohol and cigarettes.
May I ask you, how does this work with alcohol, for example? Because I used my own self-defense mechanisms, and I don't know how it is. How does this work as self-defense mechanism to turn into alcohol or drugs? It's not the same, of course. Because, for example, me, I've been trying to use more positive self-defense mechanisms, I would say, as work as well. So how does this work? What someone does think when they say, "I'll try to forget my pain and drink"? I don't know how does this work. What do you think when
What happens is when you drink alcohol, it numbs our feelings, whatever the feelings inside is.
for a while, right?
For a while, exactly right. And that's why we go in a high and we go in extreme low. And then we become addicted to this pattern of highs and lows, highs and lows, highs and lows. And we become so addicted to these natures of highs and low, it kind of becomes our primary nature. And that's why people, whenever they feel pain, the first thing they want to do is just drink alcohol. So my understanding is alcohol numbs your feelings, whatever that feelings may be. And it's interesting what you're saying, because from my perspective, there's no positive numbing or negative numbing. It's numbing. Basically, you're running away. Whether you take drugs,
You're
whether you
right.
take alcohol, work alcoholic,
That's so correct.
in the end, you're just numbing your
That's so
feelings
correct. For a while,
for a
right?
while.
For
Yeah, yeah.
for a short term. Yeah, it's very ironic what you said, very interesting, that our body, our mind tries to protect us from trauma. That's why we ignore the problem, we deny it, we turn into work, whatever. But at the end of the day, we have the opposite result. The more we avoid something, the more it's coming back, right? How does this work? That's very interesting.
Well, that's a very deep conversation and topic. Um, the way it works is kind of, we, it's pretty deep, right? Yeah. It means that maybe in previous lives you had some unresolved issues. That's why you've been given this trauma, and then you will attract the opposite of what you want to kind of give you a shake, because the same issue were in your previous lives. So the more we avoid, the more it manifests in your life.
It's so ironic because I mean our body tries to protect us and it protects us in short term. We need that sometimes because the pain may be too much.
Sure.
So we do need to hide it. We need to stop the triggers for a while, right? So at some point it's protective, but the same thing that protects you now will not help you thrive. So the thing that helps you survive will not get you to thriving, to where you want to get. And you mentioned this. It's also it's a very hot topic about past lives. That the more you avoid to experience the trauma or to deal with it, the more you deal with it. Actually, so could you perhaps could give an example about someone who avoids to deal their trauma and then they reincarnate? For example, they come to this life to deal with it again.
Sure. So let me explain in two parts of it. Let's give some examples. What could be a trauma? That could be abandonment. That could be losing temper. That could be shutting people away, people pleasing. There are all sorts of different labels. So let's look at one example: abandonment. Okay.
It's an interesting
It's
topic.
an interesting
By the
topic,
way.
right?
It's very hot.
Very hot
Many
topic.
people can relate to this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's a very, what you said, it's a very hot topic. That's why I thought it's good to share the abandonment. So let's look at this life. If your trauma was abandonment, let's say as a woman, you were abandoned by your parents. In essence, let's say it's a trauma. You don't want to be abandoned by anyone. But in current reality, you tend to repeat these patterns by attracting men who will abandon you, because it's a trauma. If you're trapped in a trauma, then you will keep repeating, keep attracting men who will abandon you. Same applies to men. Same applies to men. If men, let's say as a childhood, my dad abandoned me. Yeah. Because it's so ingrained in my nervous system, it is so ingrained in my body, I will tend to attract maybe women who are emotionally unavailable or who would leave me. Basically, simple as that. Yeah.
Rami, how does this happen in practice? Let's break it down.
Sure.
So you were abandoned, I was abandoned, and then what happens? Although we don't want this, although we hate this, we end up attracting the same pattern. How? Somehow because we feel familiar with this kind of people. And how can this happen? Because we may not realize it in the beginning, but subconsciously it looks like something happens and we do recognize the signs, and that's why we attract this person. So how does this work? I know that it's a difficult question.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I mean, let's look at examples, right? And then people can relate
Yeah.
more to it. Of course, you don't want to be with a partner who abandons you. Of course not.
Yeah.
But
Who wants to be?
who wants to be abandoned? But what really happens is this story of abandonment doesn't start from this lifetime. The story of abandonment happens from previous lives, right? Maybe you didn't deal with your trauma or your reactive nature, let's say in previous lives. So that's why you choose your parents before coming into this lifetime that I want to be born in this family who abandons me again because you and me, we haven't learned the lesson. So we choose a parent who abandon us, whether it's mom or dad. And then this cycle of abandonment carries over because you will attract a partner who will abandon you because you didn't deal with this trauma or reactive nature from previous lives.
So the idea is that by exposing yourself to this trauma, to this pain, at some point you're supposed to heal it, right?
Exactly.
That's the idea.
So the idea is to be sitting with this pain, not running away. That's the only way you can transform, you can say, from your reactive nature to your proactive nature. So let's say if I'm lonely at home, yeah, and I'm feeling kind of lonely and I have unmet needs as a child, which is to be loved, for example, then I start going in dating apps. And then I try meet people and I try to feel the energy. But this person leaves again because at home, when I was sitting before joining these dating apps, I was reactive.
Can you talk more about the reactive and the reactive nature?
Sure.
And what does this mean for someone who has no idea?
Very good question. Any trauma which hasn't been healed needs to come out. The way to come out is how? Through reactive behavior, to reactive nature. What are the forms of reactive nature? Anger is a primary one, actually. And what is the trauma behind this? Behind anger is entitlement.
Entitlement. I belong. This is mine.
This is mine.
He's mine. She's mine.
Exactly.
I own things.
I own things. I am woman. You should respect me. I am men. You should respect me. I am born in...
How trauma is related to that?
Well, that's a very interesting question.
So it has to do again with the attachment, I think.
Attachment.
Because if you're not attached to who you are, who you think you are, then you don't expect from the others to treat you in a certain way. So it has to do with the ego, doesn't it?
100%. I mean, it's a very deep thing to talk about, right? Like, for example, I once, now we are opening up a bit more deeper.
Yeah.
For years, I had anger towards my dad. For years, I would say at least since I'm a child, till 4 years ago, I had anger towards him. Then I started to question, what is it that really I'm angry about? And that was the entitlement, what we're talking about, that he didn't give me this, he didn't give me that, he didn't love me, he didn't give me a bike, he didn't give me...
He abandoned me.
Abandoned me. And all these stories actually harm me more than actually him and others, you know. So this entitlement anger that I deserve this is the cause of anger.
That makes sense. But Romy, how can someone stop having expectations in their lives? That's something that I think many people can relate to, and many people have been struggling with that, including myself. How can you pursue a dream, whatever, a career, without having the expectation? How can you desire something without having the expectation to get there? How can you love someone without being attached? I know, very hard.
It's a very hard question.
Questions. I know.
They say that I believe that desire is not the problem, or the attachment to the desire is the challenge. That you want, let's say you want to be in a relationship, you want your partner to be in a certain way. That's the attachment. The desire to be with partner is great, but the attachment that he should do that, she should this, he should behave in certain way, she should behave in certain way, and that causes deep suffering inside you. Not he is or she is how she is or he is, right?
So you're saying it's not really the desire, but it's the attachment to this desire.
Exactly.
Just thinking it's a really hard thing. It's a really difficult thing to desire something and not have expectations, whether that's a person or that's a thing. I think we people are so used to this thing, to desire things and to have expectations. That's why also we do have this extreme high and lows. We may idolize people in our lives and then devalue them as well. Exactly the opposite.
And that's an interesting topic you're saying. We can look at a very small example. You and me, we both have desire to record these talks and podcasts. It's a good thing, right? Because we want to share, we want to communicate, we're going to connect in this way. But the attachment, that whether people like it, not like it, whether you will get followers or not, whether these things going to happen or not, these are attachments.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not getting attachments of the outcome, how these discussions may look like, but the desire to genuinely serve people, help people, it's a good desire, because at the end of the day, life puts desire inside you. But the attachment is your attachment and my attachment.
How can this hold us back in life? Trauma, the attachment we have, which is related to trauma and to entitlement, you said before. Because I've seen this happening in my life, but it's interesting for the other people also to know about it. How does trauma and attachment also to our desires, it's related, that's why I put it together. How does trauma hold us back in our lives, financially, professionally, in our romantic relationships? How can trauma hold us back and down from thriving, from trying to become the best version of ourselves? Or if you want to give an example, how did trauma hold you back?
Let's look at examples, right? The way trauma holds us back is to really feel what it feels like to be on the other side. Which means that the way trauma can hold you back is to really feel love towards yourself and others. To really feel abundance in your life, but most of the time you feel scarcity.
Yeah.
The more how it holds us back is we stop trusting others and ourselves, and we control the situation, circumstances.
That's a very good example. And then what happened actually at the end of the day? Trauma led us to have lack of trust. Okay, then we make a relationship. We don't trust the other person. And what ends up happening? The relationship doesn't work. And that's what you said before. I think that we are stuck. We are trapped at our trauma. And this happens all over again, just with different people, with the same people, just with different faces. We continue to reproduce that. And also low self-worth, right? So how I have seen this in my life, when you don't believe in yourself, when you don't believe that you deserve good things in your life? How are you gonna go for them? How are you ask for a salary raise? How are you gonna pursue your dream when you don't believe that you deserve that? How are you gonna make money if you don't believe that you deserve to earn more money than you earn right now? How will you attract the right partner for you if you think that you're not good enough? I have seen this happening. Trauma holds us back with many different ways. And it's a funny thing because we may think that I will focus, like we said before, with the self defense mechanisms, I'll focus on something else, on work, for example, and then I don't care about the other thing without realizing that everything is somehow connected. And that if we don't heal the thing with low self-worth, for example, or the insecurity, this will pop up at work. This doesn't have to do only with a romantic relationship, but it has to do with the professional relationships as well, or with our friendships.
That's a very interesting thing what you're saying, that the trauma, like any other things, has two sides to it, like a coin, right? This side of the coin is pain. We are trying to avoid pain. That's the trauma's reactive behavior. The flip side of the trauma is you're looking for pleasure, always. And if you don't get the pleasure, what are you going to get? You're going to get angry. So let's say the flip side of the trauma is pleasure, and if you're not getting a pleasure, what will happen is you're going to have a belief. What belief you're going to have is low self-esteem. I'm not enough. You compromise your integrity. You compromise your values to be liked by your partner, to be liked by a job. So that's why you do jobs which doesn't pay you well, or you get stuck in a job which you don't feel happy, content, fulfilling. But what is happening in essence is you are looking for pleasure, you are not getting that pleasure, and then you start to compromise your values. And that happens mostly in a job and mostly in relationships where people lose themselves. People lose themselves just to be in a relationship, And that's why, sorry to say, but abuse happens. Could be abuse with women or men, doesn't really matter. Yeah. But the cause of the abuse is what? Low self-worth, low self-esteem, because of the pleasure you want to get. Very simple.